watched Pokemon at 0.25x speed and found out 22 details you never noticed. Like this secret hidden in this frame, or the time Pokemon snuck in a message to the entire country of Japan. But I gotta start at the very beginning. In the opening sequence of the first episode, at exactly the 49th second, you can see Charizard spit fire at Ash and his friends before they hide behind a rock. Observe that while the flames are burning, the area around the fire is distorted, like the way the fire in real life is. This is an incredible attention to detail, especially for a show that premiered in 1998. And still in the same opening, at exactly the 55th second, I noticed an anomaly. Here, Zubat is carrying Squirtle, but you see, Zubat doesn't have hands. So Squirtle must either have a magnetic shell on its back, or Zubat has invisible hands. Or a better explanation would be that the animators just made a mistake. Further into the first episode, there was a frame where I thought another mistake was made, but I was wrong. At exactly 3 minutes, 53 seconds, there's a miniature globe toy by Ash's bedside, and at first I thought to myself, what a weird way to draw the world map. But then when I looked closer, I noticed that's not our world map, but the map of the Pokemon world. And it is kinda accurate. Even more accurate was Ash's broken clock. If you skip a few frames forward, you'll see Ash's alarm clock shattered on the floor. If you observe closely, you'll see that the time is 4 a.m., which means Ash broke his clock at exactly 4 a.m. That's not all. 4 a.m. has long been associated with spiritual awakening and enlightenment. This phenomenon is often referred to as the witching hour and has been documented in many ancient cultures, including those of the Indians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans. Even till today, it is still believed that waking up at 4 a.m. is when the veil between the physical and spiritual realm is thinnest, and waking up at 4 a.m. can bring about spiritual transformation and insight into one's life. Seems Ash was not ready to be spiritually transformed or insightful about his life because my mans went back to sleep. I now see why he ended up in top 16 in the Indigo Plateau Conference. But kudos to the producers for such attention to detail. Because fast forward to episode 18, and they didn't pay much attention to detail. If you pause the episode at exactly 12 minutes and 22 seconds, you'll see that the animators made a big mistake. And for this mistake, the episode got banned after a couple of months. Speaking of big things, the animators made Gary's hand so big and weird looking when he was saying goodbye to Ash at the end of his journey at Johto. It's the 64th episode of Pokemon Master Quest, and just take a look at this! What is with Gary's hand? I bet he uses those hands to smash the subscribe button. Be like Gary and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Or you'll miss out on learning about the time that I caught a JoJo reference in the 57th episode of the XY series. Meowth poses like Jonathan Joestar and Jotaro Kuju, and while striking JoJo poses, he even mimics Dio's battle cry, shouting, While we're on the topic of copying, I observed a detail that made me rewatch this scene at 0.25x speed over and over again just to confirm. You see, Pokemon used the Enterprise D door chime sound effect from Star Trek The Next Generation when Oak updated Ash's Pokedex for Johto region Pokemon. Another time Pokemon copied music was from their own movie production, Pokemon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea. This same music is used in some parts of the 69th episode of the Diamond and Pearl series. And in the same episode, at exactly the 47th second of the 14th minute, a bunch of Team Galactic grunts throw 36 Pokeballs into the air. But when I counted the Golbat that they summoned, I only counted 15 Golbats. And this mistake just reminds me of the scene in the 11th episode where Damien illegally carries around 20 Pokeballs, all allegedly containing Pokemon. A trainer can only carry 6 Pokemon at a time in their party. I wonder who gave him the balls to do this. Maybe he didn't have a Pokédex, so he wasn't forced to use the storage system. Now, let's go back to the very beginning. The first scene of the first episode of the first season. See, the anime begins with Gengar and Nidorino Nidorino battling, but I observed something very, very familiar. The anime uses the style that is exactly like it is in the red and blue game played on the Nintendo Switch. They even used the same sound from the game. Then they went ahead to use this transition that looks like a Game Boy that was unassembled. Here, you can see the buttons, the speaker, and even the shape of the arena looking like a straightened out Game Boy. Damn! Another incredible detail for an anime produced at such a time. And what I found more incredible was this insane foreshadowing just a few frames forward. See, while Gengar and Nidorino are battling, this bulky looking silhouette calls Nidorino back into his Pokeball and calls out an Onix. Let's pause for a second and analyze this figure. You have 3 seconds to guess who this trainer is. Time's up. This is Bruno of the Indigo Elite Four, and it wasn't until the 71st episode that I saw him again. Just take a look at the physique. The bangles with spikes on his wrist, his hair, and even his trousers. If this isn't Bruno, then I don't know who is. The impressive thing about his appearance in the first episode is that Bruno summoned an Onix when he didn't have one yet. Matter of fact, the first time he ever caught an Onix was at the end of the 71st episode. This TV program Ash was watching the day before he got his Pikachu was definitely foreshadowing Bruno getting an Onix, and it has been right in front of our eyes the entire time. Another thing I missed for so long was the fact that Arcanine was supposed to be a legendary Pokemon, and I knew that for a fact after watching the second episode. As it turns out, there's a picture on the wall that has the 3 legendary birds and Arcanine on it. It didn't seem normal, so I did some digging until I found out that Nintendo first made Zapdos, Articuno, and Arcanine the legendary trio. But they removed Arcanine because 2 birds and a dog on the same team just didn't make sense. This episode was actually created a while after they removed Arcanine, so this is a detail to remind us that Arcanine was once a legendary Pokemon. 61 episodes later, in the Battle of the Badge, we get a look at Giovanni's office. And then I saw a picture on his wall that blew my mind when I paid close attention to the background. It's an image that matches Mewtwo's sprite from the Pokemon Red and Blue game. I wonder why the picture was there. Maybe it was because Giovanni was the first one who Mewtwo obeyed. I also wonder how Ash had not one, but 2 Pikachus in the 158th episode of the Diamond and Pearl series. If you pause the episode at exactly 6 minutes and 28 seconds, you'll see one Pikachu on Ash's shoulder and another on the ground right beside Ash's leg. But a few frames forward, we can only see the one on Ash's shoulder. Turns out the one on the floor was just a glitch. And it wasn't as funny as the glitch I caught in the Pokemon movies, Victini and Zekrom and Victini and Reshiram. Because while Ash had 2 Pikachus in the former, he had 2 mouths in this one. You see, in the movie, just before Victini reveals itself, Ash asks Victini if it lent him its powers. When Ash says this, his lips do not move with the rest of his mouth. Rather, it splits into 2. And that's not the only time his body part is split into 2. He even grew an extra finger in the 12th episode of the Pokemon Journeys. At exactly 15 minutes and 8 seconds, Ash grows an extra pinky finger while cheering for this guy. And speaking of fingers, in the second episode of the Pokemon Origins, we get to see fingers of a ghost. At the 25th second of the 2nd minute into the episode, Red is at the Poke Center in Lavender Town talking about ghosts with a woman. Then she asks him if he really thinks there are ghosts at the Pokemon graveyard. As Red replies that he doesn't think so, we can see a very vague white hand just about to touch his shoulder. She mentions the hand, but when Red looks back, the hand's gone. This wasn't a creepy detail meant to scare me. It was a reference to an NPC chat that happened in the old Pokemon games in Lavender Town. But this reference wasn't as mind-blowing as the one in the 5th episode of Advanced Battle Gaining Groudon. In this episode, 2 rivaling villainous teams, Team Aqua and Team Magma, are at war. And this girl here sneaks into Team Magma's ship and sneaks out Kyogre. In the scene where she sneaks out Kyogre, she types in the password 0031. I knew that password wasn't random, so I started digging around for what it meant, and you wouldn't believe what I found. See, in the Gold and Silver Pokemon game, individual values determine how high or low a particular base stat can possibly be. That's really subtle, but it doesn't compare to the hidden message Pokemon sent to Japan in the 70th episode of the Pokemon Journey series. Here, James reads a newspaper that has a hidden message on the top corner of the right page. Some of the text is either cut off or too small to read or translate. This writing translates to "Don't lose to the coronavirus." This subtle message of hope came when Japan needed it most. Coast. It was June 2021, the peak of Japan's COVID-19 wave, with the country registering under 800,000 cases nationwide. Regardless, the country survived. The same way Mewtwo survived at the end of Mewtwo Returns. This detail was not too subtle, but I bet you missed it. At the end of Mewtwo Returns, Mewtwo is shown overlooking a faraway city that greatly resembles New York City. If you pay attention to the buildings in the distance, you will see a cheap knockoff of the Chrysler Building and the MetLife Building. And that's just 2. If you want to see even worse Pokemon knockoffs that failed terribly, then click the video on your screen.